Evolving Skies is the 7th Pokemon Sword and Shield set. It is also going to go down in history as the most legendary Sword and Shield era sets. It has the Rayquaza, it has all of the evolutions, it has some of the most iconic alt arts in the entirety of the Pokemon trading card game. And from a gameplay perspective, it was very strong as well. That being said, a number of the cards that hit really hard at the time from Evolving Skies have kind of fizzled out. I'm Jet from inthirdperson.com. Make sure to like the video, subscribe to the channel, and let's talk about Evolving Skies. A big focus of this set were the evolutions, and all of the evolutions got VMAXs, and from a competitive standpoint, the strongest of the bunch was Jolteon VMAX. Now you look at its HP, it's a little low, it has no retreat cost, but its move Max Thunder Rumble did 100 damage to the active and 100 damage to the bench for any Pokemon that had damage on it. And you might be thinking 100 isn't a lot, but in a world of VMAXs and being able to do quick shooting Inteleon, you could knock out 2 VMAXs in only 3 turns. And this is before Manaphy as well, so bench sniping was wide open, and Jolteon was sniping decks out like crazy. Even in the world of Mew VMAX and Fusion Strike, Jolteon was the second best deck in the game, and because of some of the control elements that it had in that deck, including Path to the Peak, Jolteon actually had a decent shot of beating Mew VMAX consistently. However, in 2022, we saw the introduction of Brilliant Stars, we saw Manaphy enter the format to protect the bench, we saw a shift towards V-Star Pokemon that were only coughing up 2 prizes instead of 3, and Jolteon is really tough to play in modern times. I do still run into this deck very rarely from time to time from players trying to make it work, but even in the world where you still have canceling Cologne and stuff like that, I don't think it's enough to get Jolteon back into prominence. Umbreon VMAX was another heavy hitter, and not just because the absolutely iconic alt art. I actually have this in PTCGO, but I don't have it in real. I wish I had it in real life. Anyhow, Umbreon VMAX was very strong at the time. It was a single strike Pokemon, and you load this up with 3 single strike energy, and you bump up the damage from 160 to usually 80, 200, usually 220. Sometimes it could go even higher than that. But the big thing was its Dark Signal ability, which allowed you to gust up a Pokemon from the bench to the active, making it really easy to cherry pick targets for Umbreon to take out, or for its partner in crime, Single Strike Urshifu VMAX. Between the two of them being able to cover hitting for dark and for fighting, were able to pretty much cover the meta at the time, which made it one of the strongest decks. Even in the Fusion Strike Mew era, it definitely had Mew shaking in its boots because Umbreon could just tear it apart. Unfortunately, this card is just not good enough anymore. The entire archetype of Single Strike just isn't enough to keep up with the current meta. A little clunky to use. Umbreon drops 3 prizes, and it's not hitting as hard as it used to, or at least not taking as many prizes as it used to. So Umbreon is kind of unplayable right now, unfortunately. Oddly enough, at the time of its release, Espeon VMAX was considered one of, if not the worst evolution in the set. And now how times have changed. It's Silver Tempest, end of 2022, and Espeon VMAX is pretty much the only evolution that we can even play in the game. And not because of its attack, which is, it's mid at best, but its Solar Revelation ability helps prevent your Pokemon from being affected from your opponent's attacks. So things like Star Requiem from Giratina, Lost Mind by Sableye, Amazing Destruction by Yveltal. Any Pokemon with energy on your side get protected thanks to Espeon VMAX, which makes it useful in many different decks today. I normally don't talk about the V if there's a corresponding VMAX, but we do have to talk about Leafeon V. Leafeon V was great. not so much for its attack, but its Greeting Cell's ability, allowing you to accelerate energy from the deck to any of your Pokemon on the board, is fantastic acceleration, especially when paired with Leafeon VMAX, where on the second turn you could pretty consistently hit Grass Knot, which is a move that did damage based on your opponent's retreat cost. And you put Galar Mine as the stadium down, and you would hit for 2 more retreat. And certain decks, you could get huge one-hit KOs on some of the biggest Pokemon in the game, or at least do devastating damage to decks like Single Strike Urshifu and Deralidon and a number of others. Leafeon VMAX with the Shady Dealings engine is one of my all-time favorite decks to play because of how consistent it worked and how fun it was to use Leafeon's abilities and gusting things up with boss's orders and then just locking them down with the Galar Mine and smashing them with Grass Knot. It was awesome. Unfortunately, this card, like many other VMAXs, have just been outpaced and out-tempoed by V-Stars, where they only give up 2 prizes and Leafeon gives up 3. I've seen a couple players here and there try to make this work with like Arceus and stuff, but I would not hold my breath for a Leafeon VMAX comeback in its final year. Sylveon VMAX was kind of cool. It had the cool attack Max Harmony, where you did 70 damage plus 30 more damage for each different type of Pokemon on your bench. So you were looking to make a board like with a water type, a fighting type, a grass type, however you spread it out. And it gave you a lot of flexibility in terms of how you build your team around Sylveon. However, I found it to be kind of inconsistent and the damage ultimately not worth it, so this was kind of a secondary archetype. It did find some success later on with Arceus V-Star, and Sylveon was using its Precious Touch. Oh, what, not Precious Touch? It was Sylveon V that had the gift ability where you could get an item from your deck and then evolve up to Arceus. It was a whole thing. Sylveon VMAX did see some success here and there, but I think at this point it's largely unplayable. Flareon is here largely because we just have to talk about all of the evolutions, and this one has been not good for the most part. It has the move Max Detonate for 1 fire and 2 colorless, does 100 damage for each energy card you flip, and you flip 5 cards to see what it is. I've seen a couple of players theorize that Flareon VMAX could work in a Lost Zone deck, kind of like the way Celebrations Kyogre is right now. You energy recycler all of the cards back in, and then you're guaranteed to get the 5 energy off the top if you've only got 5 cards in your deck. I don't know if it's a viable enough strategy to bring Flareon back, but it'd be kind of cool to see it work. Glacial VMAX is just bad. I tried to make this card work. I actually pulled a bunch of Glaceons early on in PTCGO, and I really wanted this to work. I tried pairing it with Suicune, I tried playing it by itself, and unfortunately its Crystal Veil ability is just a little too flimsy. Yes, you could block attacks from VMAX, but you can gust around it, and its damage just wasn't good enough. And especially now in a world of V-Stars where you're not even really blocking, you're not even fighting against VMAXs all that much, Glaceon VMAX is unplayable. Vaporeon VMAX was kind of cool. It had the move Max Torrent for 100 damage, and if your opponent's active Pokemon had any damage on it already, you could do 100 more damage. There was also an item that let you lower the attack cost of Vaporeon VMAX, so you could attack with 1 attachment. It's kind of cool, but at this point, it's basically a worse Samurott V-Star, and Samurott V-Star is currently shaky at best, so Vaporeon VMAX is pretty much unplayable in current times. Surprisingly enough, the most successful card coming out of Evolving Skies from a competitive standpoint, Deralidon VMAX. At the time, people weren't really talking about this card, despite its bonkers ability to stop attacks from special energy and also having a great move in 220 Shred. A lot of players were off-put by its attack cost with 1 fighting and 2 metal energy. However, once Arceus was introduced into the game, that changed the whole thing, made Deralidon a lot more viable to play, and it's still a juggernaut to this day. Though I do remember the days of playing this with like Zacian to attach a bunch of energy to itself, and then you would use Bronzong to move the energy to Deralidon. It was crazy, but even in those days, I was like, this Deralidon card is really good. And it's proven out to be one of the best cards competitively in the Sword and Shield era. Also surprising, Rayquaza VMAX. This was the most hyped card from a competitive perspective going into the release of Evolving Skies. It's based on a different Rayquaza that did really well in competitive play. And then this came out, and I traded a whole bunch of cards to complete my Rayquaza set. And this card is miserable. It's weird. Like, we've seen this attack before, Max Burst, or an attack like Max Burst, where you discard a bunch of energy. You're doing 80 damage for each you discard, plus 20, and it's just really clunky because you also have to attach a fire energy. You probably need to attach like 3 to 5 lightning energy. You can use the Flaffies for that, but then what's getting hit in the active while you're trying to get set up? And then once you unload all that energy, now you have to bring in a second Rayquaza or some other attacker into the active to while you also then load the energy back on with Flaffy. It was a mess, and I just don't think this card is good at all. It fell off the face of the earth basically immediately, and people only really care for the alt art, which is gorgeous, by the way. But from a playability perspective, Rayquaza VMAX might be the single biggest disappointment in the Sword and Shield era. Oh, did I also mention that finding the fire energy was like impossible in these decks as well? It was, a favorite among Urshifu players, Metacham V, had a really nifty attack in Yoga Loop, where for 2 colorless energy, you put 2 damage counters on one of your opponent's Pokemon, and if your opponent's knocked out by Yoga Loop, you get to take another turn. It is very difficult to use. You're going to have to strategize and set up the damage so that Metacham could come in, knock out something with only 2 damage, and then get an extra turn. But for players that could pull this off consistently, it was nuts. And yeah, shout outs to Tord Reklev and other Urshifu experts who really made this card shine. One of the most trolly decks of this era, Dracazel VMAX, was super annoying, 330 HP, and it had the move Spark Trap for 1 lightning energy. You do 60 damage, and if your opponent attacks you on the next turn, you do 120 damage to them in return. And so what you would do is you would Spark Trap for 60, and then once you got hit, you're 330 HP, you're probably not getting knocked out in 1 hit. You would use all of your healing cards, your Lucky Ice Pops, your Team Yell Towels, your potions, and what have you, in order to keep Dracazolt alive. Your deck was usually just 4 Dracazolt V and 4 Dracazolt VMAX, and you usually just tried to have none on the bench or 1 on the bench at most. And it's popped up here and there, like especially when Palkia was rising up. This one kind of came back into prominence, but never really found its way in a competitive sense other than being YouTube fodder for content creators and trolls online. Skiploom and Jumpluff were an interesting combo. Once you evolved from Hoppip to Skiploom, if you attached an energy to the Skiploom, you could evolve right away to the Jumpluff, and the Jumpluff had a cool ability where you could actually attack twice per turn. For 1 energy, you did 60 damage. Since you have the ability, you attack twice. For 1 energy, doing 120 damage, it's not bad. And on top of that, you could actually use one of the scroll attacks to do even more damage or do spread damage and attack twice. Now, the idea of Jumpluff was really cool, but what really held it back was that it was a stage 2 deck. And even with the Skiploom that lets you jump in evolution, it just wasn't consistent enough or fast enough to keep up with the other VMAXs in the meta. Finding its flippers later on in life, Gyarados VMAX is a card that did find its way into the competitive scene thanks to Arceus V-Star. Its moves cost a lot, 3 water, 4 water, 3 energy, 4 energy. But with Arceus V-Star, you were able to quickly accelerate to Gyarados, at which point it could do Hyper Beam for 120 damage, knock off an energy, Max Tyrant for 240, or you put a memory capsule on this and you access Gyarados V's outrage attack. I don't know if that's the exact term, but it basically did like double the damage back to your opponent for whatever Gyarados has and could one-shot anything in the game. So the combo was Gyarados VMAX with Arceus V-Star and the other Jolteon with memory capsule to shut off other water decks, and this one was kind of cool. For a time, Suicune V was very popular. For only 2 energy, could do 20 damage plus 20 more for each Pokemon on either play on both benches. So this could hit up to 220 damage on a 2-prize Pokemon, and paired up with Ludicolo. And I don't know where's Ludicolo. Ludicolo, you could then increase the damage by 100, which gave Suicune the opportunity to one-hit KO anything in the game. Just before Palkia showed up, there was a crazy build of Suicune with like Melanies and Raihans and cross switchers, and it was absolutely nuts what this deck could do. It was really hard to play, but it was incredibly powerful and fun to see in action. Unfortunately, Palkia V-Star came out and it's basically a better Suicune, so there's pretty much no reason to play this card now. Volcarona V was the sidekick to Celebration's Kyogre in that awful deck. That awful Kyogre deck from back in the day. Shoutouts to Tricky Jim for popularizing that, being the meme deck of 2021, where Kyogre would flip over a whole bunch of cards and just do a whole bunch of spread damage based on what energy you flipped. And then you would bench Volcarona at the end of the game to do a billion damage and throw all that energy back into the deck. Now, that particular version of Kyogre isn't in play anymore, but from what I have heard, Volcarona is very good in Expanded, or at least had its moment in the sun as a deck archetype on its own in Expanded. So kudos to Volcarona for sticking around. All right, moving on to some of the more noteworthy single prize Pokemon. We've got Eldegoss, which has Cotton Lift, able to grab 2 energy from the deck and put it into your hand. I think Smeargle is one of the cards that really took advantage of this, but it's a pretty nifty ability to have. You'd also pair this with Cherim, so Cherim could attach the grass energy and so on. Oh, pairing this with Reggie Drago. That was the deck. Ugh. In certain decks, Milotic was really helpful, where you could prevent people from Marnieing you thanks to the Dugard ability. I think Galerian Berserker V is the one that uses this now, but there are a couple of attackers like an Indeedee as well that relied on a big hand size in order to attack, and Milotic was the card you would need to protect yourself from Marnie. Going along with the Kyogre deck, Cryogonal was your energy acceleration engine. Using Element Chain, you look at the top 6 cards of your deck and attach a billion energy to your Kyogres, and then you would just retreat, go into the Kyogre and go. And if you lost the Cryogonal, it wasn't that big of a deal because Kyogre would come in and probably take 2 to 4 prizes when it entered the active. Unfortunately, with Manaphy entering the format, this deck basically died, and Cryogonal hasn't really been seen since. Wishy Washy was kinda cool. It has only 30 HP, but if you put 3 or more energy on it, it increases its HP up by 150, making it a 180 HP single prize Pokemon, which is really big. You could power this up with Frostmoth and attach a whole bunch of water energy, and this one did 30 damage plus 30 more damage for each basic energy attached to this Pokemon. I have fought this deck a couple of times. I've even lost against the Wishy Washy deck. I think I built it as well, so I have played this as well. It's not great, but it's kind of a fun meme deck. Ice-Q has become a late Bloomer thanks to its move Block Face, where during your opponent's next turn, prevent all damage done to this Pokemon by attacks from basic Pokemon. This is the arch nemesis of Reggie Gigas, super annoying for Lost Box decks as well, where basic attack decks, and Blissey, for example, where decks with basic attackers just can't hit through Ice Q and then you just lose. It is clunky to set up, it's bad in most matchups, but for certain matchups, Ice Q is basically the Grim Reaper, a personal favorite of mine from this set. Flaffy accelerates energy to the bench from the discard pile, and there were so many cool lightning decks that can be made with Flaffy. And at the time of this recording, we're seeing the Flaffy box with Zekrom and Raikou, and some have Raichu in it, and some have Oleki in it. Whatever the case is, Flaffy has been pretty much a staple of Lightning decks since its release in Evolving Skies, and it might have a bright future going forward as Scarlet and Violet's mascot characters. I can't remember if it's Koraidon or Miraidon. One of them is a Lightning type Pokemon as well, which will help set up the Mareeps on the board to then bring the Flaffies out quicker. Reggie Oleki is a solid card for 2 lightning and 1 colorless, does 120 damage and 40 snipe to 2 targets, softening up targets on the bench. This one was an okay card in lightning based decks, but has really found a home in the Reggie Gigas deck as one of, if not the primary attacker of the whole thing. Put a Choice Belt on there and you're one-hit KOing Palkia and Lugia, which is pretty incredible. Galerian Articuno saw a little bit of play in Shadow Rider decks, where its Cruel Charge ability allowed you to accelerate energy from your hand to this Articuno when you put it on the board. You weren't really using the Psy Laser attack at all. I have used it from time to time, but for the most part, it's there just to charge up Shadow Rider and possibly Mewtwo V-Star as well. Galarian Zapdos saw like a little bit of play. There was a Sirfetch'd deck where you could move energy to the Sirfetch'd and it could do like 200 plus damage in a turn. It was memey at best. Now there is a Hisuian Arcanine V deck that works on a similar concept. It's a lot better than the Sirfetch'd, and Zapdos is its partner in that one. This card I have called the Angel of Death. Galerian Moltres has that same ability where when you put it on the board, you can accelerate 2 dark energy from your hand to this Moltres, but this card was crazy. Because of its Fiery Wrath move, does 20 damage plus 50 more damage for each prize card your opponent has taken. So once you get down to 5 prize cards, you're doing 270 damage with this Moltres. Later on, throw a Choice Belt on there, 300 damage. You're one-hit KOing every V-Star and V in the game. Bananas. And especially in a world where Mew VMAX was running around, this was its arch nemesis. Galarian Moltres just had to drop in twice and could win the game just like that. It was crazy. We don't see this card as much anymore, especially in a world where Drapion VMAX exists. Not Drapion VMAX, where Drapion V exists, but this card definitely had its opportunity to shine for quite some time. Another rogue tier hero, Zorark, with the Phantom Transformation ability, allowing it to transform into any Stage 1 Pokemon without a rule box. I think it's without a rule box. No, any Stage 1 Pokemon except Zorark. And you could turn into all sorts of different stuff. There was Wormadams, Raichus, the Slowbro, and so on. Pretty much pick an attacker for every occasion you could pack in there. Bryxon was one. And this deck is it's been a struggle. Like, covering the 2 colorless energy was a problem before Double Turbo came into the format, and then it just kind of needed all of the attackers to cover all of the meta matchups. I think with Silver Tempest, with having an answer to Lugia and Palkia finally with Raichu, does help it out. It has placed here and there, and Zorark is seemingly finding its footing now. Some of Zorark's transformation partners are also from Evolving Skies. Flapple is one of them as a really strong attacker, punishing opponents who have abilities on their cards, doing 50 damage for each of your opponent's Pokemon that has an ability, potentially getting one-hit KOs on Vs and even VMAXs if their bench is full of abilities. Then we have Appleton, the Lugia Killer, with its thick mucus attack does 70 damage for each special energy card attached to your opponent's Pokemon. In a world where Lugia is running around attaching special energies left and right, Appleton is there to keep Lugia in check. There was a time when people were playing this Reggie Drago. It is a basic Pokemon where 2 grass and 1 fire energy does 240 damage minus 20 damage for each damage counter on this Pokemon. There were times where this card would just absolutely dominate, thanks to Cherim for energy acceleration and Eldegoss for grabbing the energy. This was an absolute nightmare to fight against, and I'm actually kind of surprised that people don't play this deck more often. I think the problem is there's a bunch of really strong single prize archetypes where this card can't keep up, but there are a couple of people who still play this card in their Regigigas decks as an alternative attacker. Let's move on to trainer cards, and Booshake is a favorite of Galerian Weezing, where it allows you to get a evolution card from your deck, play it immediately, end your turn. And where this becomes the most devastating is Galerian Weezing in the active, you play the Booshake, or play the Coughing, evolve into Weezing on turn 1, and then all of a sudden your opponent has no abilities, and there are a number of ability-based decks that just don't function when Weezing's out there, and if you can stop them from the very first turn, it's GG's. Crystal Cave, a favorite of Metal and Dragon type decks, where you heal 30 damage from your Dragon and Metal type Pokemon, really handy to have. The Evolutions each got an item that helped them out in some way, shape, or form. Elemental Badge was the biggest one, though, for Jolteon in particular, where you cut its attack cost by 1 colorless energy, allowing Jolteon to attack with just 1 energy. Lucky Ice Pop is a super annoying healing card where you heal 20 and then you flip a coin, and if you hit heads, you can keep the card and use it again. And a lot of decks that require healing play a bunch of Lucky Ice Pops to heal. One of my favorite trainers, Raihan, does double duty in allowing you to accelerate energy from your discard pile to one of your Pokemon, and then also grab a card of your choice. Just a random observation here, I've been looking at a lot more deck lists from Japan, and I find that Japan loves Raihan. Almost every deck has Raihan in it, and I love having Raihan in my decks, but a number of Western decks have kind of moved away from Raihan, which is a little weird because I think this card is still really good. For single prize decks, Rescue Carrier is super clutch, allowing you to rescue multiple Pokemon, up to 2 Pokemon with 90 HP or less from your discard pile, get them back into your hand. This one was a favorite in Zorobox and as well as Malamar. And last but not least, Stormy Mountain, a really handy stadium for lightning types and dragon types. These allow you to bench a lightning or dragon type Pokemon from your deck straight onto the field. Whew, I'm all petered out. That was a lot of cards for Evolving Skies. This might be the longest episode in the series because of how many great cards we had to cover. And there was a time where this set was massive from a gameplay perspective. Unfortunately, its reliance on VMAX Pokemon have really hurt it in the long term. V-Stars just kind of outpace most of the VMAXs in this set, but even so, there are a couple of deck archetypes that still exist to this day that are just thriving in modern times, making Evolving Skies one of the strongest sets to ever come out in the Sword and Shield era. All right, that's going to do it for me. Thank you so much for sticking around on this kind of long video, and I truly appreciate your support for watching these retrospectives. Admittedly, these ones kind of don't do as well on my channel relative to the deck profiles and some of the other stuff that I do, but I really love being able to share the knowledge that I do have. Admittedly, I don't have a lot of knowledge. I've only been playing during the Sword and Shield era of the Pokemon trading card game, but any sort of context I can provide for you, for new players coming in, or if you just want to relive the glory days of the Sword and Shield era, I'm here for you. All right, let's get out of here. Some quick plugs before we go. You can find me on all of the things: YouTube, TikTok, Twitter, and Instagram at @InThirdPerson. You can find me over on Twitch at @InThirdPerson, where I stream the Pokemon trading card game every Sunday at 9 a.m. And check out the website, inthirdperson.com, for more articles and videos on video games, board games, and other nerdy pursuits. So until the next one, thank you so much for watching, and I'll see you later. Bye-bye.